In this section of the course, we're going to consider the subject of assets and content inside Unity, which is really important. Whenever you create a completely new and empty Unity project, we really don't get much in the way of content. That is, we get a blank, empty scene. Well, it's empty except for the directional light and the main camera, which are created by default. But if you take a look at the project panel, you can see it says straight away, this folder is empty. We haven't got anything like characters, props, weapons, textures, materials, sounds, animations. We don't have any of that stuff that we can use to populate our game world. All the kinds of things that we can see and hear, we don't have any of that stuff. So in this section, we're going to be looking at different ways in which we can add content to our Unity projects. And in this movie, I'm going to get started by looking specifically at how we can create some pretty simple primitive objects that we can add to the scene. Primitives like cubes, cylinders, planes, and we're even going to tweak a pretty basic light for the scene. So to get started at creating this kind of content, I'm going to move up here to the Game Object menu. This is the menu we should go to whenever we want to create any kind of inbuilt pre-made content. So I'm going to choose the menu item, Game Object, 3D Object, and we've got a range of different objects that we can add to the scene. Now remember, these are basic primitive types. Unity is capable of importing a lot more intricate content, and we're going to see that in later movies. I'm going to start by adding a plane object, which effectively is a flat surface. So I'm going to select plane to add that to the scene. As we've seen, we can use the translate tools to move this object around. You can see in the hierarchy panel here that the plane object has been added to the scene. And when I select the plane, I can specify its position here inside the object inspector. So I'm going to set the plane to the world origin at 0, 0, 0. This means that its gizmo and transformation will be centered here at the world origin. So this object has been added to the scene at the world origin. Now here's a neat trick that you should do. First of all, whenever you add new objects to the scene here, you should make a decision about whether the object can move, like the player character or enemy characters, or whether the object is completely stationary, like walls, floors, and the ceilings. In this case, this is a completely stationary object. It's never going to move during gameplay. If we know that in advance, as we do in this case, then we should move to the Object Inspector and activate the static checkbox. When you do this, Unity can perform some internal optimizations that can make your scenes look even better and your games run even faster. So this is a great optimization to perform. I'm also going to add some other objects to the scene, some cubes, for example. So I'm going to choose Game Object, 3D Object, and then select Cube, and just bring that up into the scene. Now I want to make this a little bit larger, so I'm going to switch to the Scale tool, which we've seen before, which is this tool here. I can select that with the R key on the keyboard and click and drag to increase the size of the cube. I'm just going to raise that up a little bit and just move that over to maybe this side of the floor. Just bring it down a little bit and just grab that object. Now again, because this is like the floor, this object is never going to move during gameplay. I'm going to move over here to the Object Inspector and activate the static checkbox. Unity performs some internal optimizations and can make that object look better. Now I'm going to grab this object, and effectively I want to make a duplicate of this object and simply change its position in the level. I can do that by simply right-clicking on the object and selecting Duplicate from the context menu. In addition, on a Mac I can choose Command D, and on a PC it's Control D to duplicate the object. If I select the object and choose Command D or Control D, you can see in the hierarchy panel that a duplicate object has been made, and right now it's in exactly the same position as the original. But if I use the Translate tool, I can move that object away, and we've created a duplicate inside the scene. I'm going to now choose Game Object, 3D Object, and I'm going to add a sphere object to the scene. Once again, I think this is pretty small, so I'm going to switch to the Scale tool here and click and drag to make the object larger, bring that maybe over to this area here, just raise that up just a little bit. Let me use viewport navigation just to kind of check whether this object is resting on the ground as much as it could do, and maybe positioning it to about there. Again, move to the object inspector, activate the static checkbox to enable that option for the object here. And now we have a scene with 3 primitive objects resting on a ground plane. I think we should actually change the lighting too. So to do that, I'm going to select the directional light that's in the scene and delete that. I can right click and choose delete. Alternatively, on a PC, I can press the delete key to delete the selected object. And on a Mac, I can choose Command Backspace to delete that object. Now, when I do this, you can see that the lighting in the scene has changed, which is understandable since I've removed the only light that we had, and I want to add a completely new light. So to do that, I'm going to choose Game Object, Light, and this time right now, I'm just going to add a point light, which is good for simulating light bulbs and other kinds of interior artificial light. So I'm just going to select Point Light and use the Translate tool. Remember, that's the W key to move and position this object in the scene. So I'm going to bring the light maybe somewhere over here to illuminate this area. By selecting the light and moving to the object inspector, you'll see that there is a color field here. By default, the color is white. I'm going to change that to maybe a deep shade of red just by selecting on it and selecting the color from the color picker, and just close that here. We also get the option to choose whether this light is going to cast shadows under the shadow type field. By default, it says no shadows. I'm going to change that to soft shadows here. And you can see already these objects begin to cast shadows. I'm going to select this light and press Command D or Control D to duplicate this object and create a second light. But this time I'm going to change the color to maybe some kind of blue shade, something kind of like this. And actually that's looking pretty good. So we've managed to create 2 lights in the scene, one red, one blue, and we've managed to create some primitive objects, cubes, spheres, and a ground plane. And just by using the Game Object menu, we've managed to add a whole range of content to the scene to create this kind of basic setup here. These are basic primitive objects, but they can be useful for blocking out the basic design of a level.